There is a fall from the highest place there is, from heaven, from everything she was. She came down through storm and silence, wings broken, with nothing left. And then a prince, chosen by fate, just a man with steady eyes, who looked at something divine and fallen. Let the story find you. The roses in the palace garden had not bloomed in 3 years. Everyone blamed the long winter. Prince Alaric knew better. They had simply been waiting for a reason. He found her at dawn, tangled in the thorn bushes at the far edge of the garden wall, the place where the old grounds ended and the wild forest began. She was sitting upright against the stone, very still, silver hair loose around her shoulders like a river that had forgotten which way to run. Her eyes were covered and completely, impossibly unseeing. She was not from here. He knew that the way a song is beautiful before you understand its words. Her gown was white, but torn to ribbons at the hem, tattered as though it had passed through something violent and ancient to arrive here. Her silver hair, the color of ash and moonlight, fell loose around her shoulders. Across her throat and arms and chest, gold celestial script ran in patterns that seemed to breathe, older than any language he had been taught, glowing faintly where the morning light touched them. A crown of dark roses and thorned wire rested on her face, and across her eyes was bound a strip of cloth, not a wound, he understood, a mark of what she had been. Behind her shoulders, draped over the thorns like broken sails, were 2 enormous wings, deep storm grey, each feather long and dark as a winter sky, crumpled, scattered as though she had fallen from a very great height. Alaric stood still for a long moment. His hair caught the early light, and his blue eyes, the kind of blue that his tutors called a soldier's blue, steady and unflinching, were wide for the first time in years. "You are staring," she said, without moving. Her voice was low and unhurried, like water over smooth stone. "I can feel you staring." "How can you feel us stare?" he asked, before courtesy caught up with curiosity. The corner of her mouth lifted, but barely. When you cannot see, everything else sharpens. Your boots are expensive. Your breathing slowed when you saw my wings. You were afraid, but you did not run. She tilted her head. "That makes you either very brave or very foolish." "My father would say those are the same thing." She smiled properly, and the thorns around her, he would swear it to his dying day, seemed to lean away. "What is your name?" he asked. "Ophelia," she said. "And yours?" "Alaric." She was quiet for a moment. "That is a name that carries weight, and be careful with it," she said softly. He sat down in the grass beside her, which was not the princely thing to do, and was also, he sensed, exactly right. He brought her inside before the gardeners came. Not the palace, the old groundkeeper's cottage at the gardener's edge, empty since the old man had retired, still smelling of dried lavender and soil. He lit the hearth himself, because he could not explain her to a servant, and then stood by the window, feeling thoroughly out of his depth. As a fallen angel assessed a room she could not see by running her fingertips along every surface. "Stone walls," she said. "A table with one leg, slightly shorter than the others. A window facing east. I can feel the warmth on my left cheek." She paused. "Whoever lived here grew rosemary on the sill and let them dry in bundles. That tells you something kind about them." "It tells they grew rosemary," Alarak said. "It tells me they believed the ordinary world was worth preserving." She turned toward him, her sightless eyes not quite meeting his face, close but slightly to the right, like starlight that bends near the horizon. "You are still wondering if you should report this." He was. His father had very clear edicts about beings from other realms. The treaties with the celestial orders were old and complicated, and not, as far as Alaric understood them, particularly warm. And a fallen angel in the royal garden was not a matter of should he tell, it was a matter of when. He told no one. Instead, he came back the next morning, and the morning after that. He brought bread, soft cheese and apples, and later, because she had mentioned in passing that she missed music, a small wooden flute which he had not played since childhood. He played it badly. She listened as though it were a symphony. "You keep coming back," she said, one grey afternoon, seated by the window with a bloom of pale light across her face. Her wings had begun to mend, slowly, painfully, feather by feather, the dark grey lightening at the tips to something closer to silver. "You have a kingdom to inherit." "The kingdom will wait," he said. "It always does." She reached out then, slowly, carefully, the way you move near something you do not wish to startle, and found his hands with hers. She did not hold them. She simply rested her fingers over his knuckles, reading the shape of him. "Tell me what you look like," she said quietly. He had never been asked this. Portraits had been painted, songs had been sung by courtiers, but no one had ever simply asked him to describe himself, the way you describe something you have chosen to care about. "Fair hair," he said, "my mother's color, blue eyes, a scar on my chin from a training accident when I was 11. My hands are rougher than they should be for a prince, because I prefer the sword yard to the throne room. And I'm told I look serious even when I'm not. Her fingers traced so gently along his jaw, the line of his chin, the small ridge of that old scar. She was mapping him. He held very still and felt something in his chest rearrange itself permanently. You look kind, she said. That is what your face tells me. The roses bloomed the next day, all of them at once, as though the garden had made up its mind. The edict arrived from his father's council on the 21st morning. It was not about Ophelia specifically. It could not have been. No one knew. It was a broader decree that any celestial being found within the kingdom's borders without the crown's sanction would be bound and returned to the celestial orders for judgment. The penalty for sheltering one, the parchment noted in the careful language of royal law, was the forfeit of the title. Alaric read it twice, alone in his chambers, while the early autumn light came through the high windows and turned everything in the room the color of old honey. He folded the parchment and set it in the hearth fire. He was not naive enough to think love solved political problems. He was not idealistic enough to believe that kingdoms change their minds easily. But he was somewhere under all his training and all his titles, still the boy who had sat down in the grass beside a fallen stranger, because something in him had simply known she mattered. He went to the cottage and told her everything. She listened without moving, and when he finished, the room held the particular silence of a thing that has been set down gently but cannot be picked up the same way. Alaric, she said at last, and her voice was very careful, like someone carrying something fragile across the long room. I know about the edict. I have known for 3 days. She turned toward him. The celestial order sent me. Her sightless eyes were steady, heartbreakingly steady. I was meant to be a messenger, a test of the kingdom's loyalty to the old treaties. She exhaled, slow and quiet. But I fell, truly fell, because I arrived. My wings broke in the crossing. And then you found me. And I could not. She stopped. I was not supposed to let you matter. The fire crackled between them. Did you, he asked, let me matter? She made a sound that was almost a laugh, soft and helpless, and entirely unguarded. You played the flute so badly, she said, and you kept coming back. You described yourself to me as though you were trying to be fair about it, as though I might judge. She shook her head. Yes, you mattered, and I'm sorry. Don't be, he said. and crossed the room. He stood in front of her and did not know what to do with his hands, which had never been a problem before. He was a soldier's son. He was trained in certainty, and here, in a small warm cottage, smelling of old lavender, with a fallen angel looking slightly past his left ear, he felt more certain than he had about anything. He reached out and took both of her hands in his. They were cold. They were always slightly cool, as though she carried a little of the sky inside her still. And she turned her upwards immediately, holding his palm in return. "I do not know how this ends," he said honestly. "Neither do I. I fell from grace. I was not supposed to feel things the way I do. I was not supposed to." She pressed her lips. "The orders will call me back eventually, whether I want to go or not. And if I went with you..." She stilled completely. "You are a prince." "I'm a person," he said quietly, "who is standing in front of you." She reached up then, both hands leaving his to find his face, the way she had weeks ago, that first mapping, except this time she was not reading him. She was holding him. Her hands, her thumbs, rested on his cheekbones, her finger in his hair, and she tilted her face up toward his. Her sightless eyes, finally, perfectly aimed directly at him. "Tell me what you see right now," she whispered. "You," he said, "just you." He kissed her the way you read the last page of a beloved book, slowly, and with the full knowledge that you are doing something you will never stop being glad you did. She made a small sound against her lips, surprise and warmth and surrender folded together, and her hands tightened in his hair behind her, against the cottage wall. Her wings spread, both of them, wide and full, the storm grey and the silver catching the firelight. Fully healed, she had not known until this moment. Fully whole, as though his name and her name, spoken in the same room, had been the thing they were waiting for. When they parted, she was breathing a little unevenly. He rested his forehead against hers, and neither of them spoke, because the room was already so full of something that words would have been clumsy. "Your wings," he said finally. She laughed, a real laugh this time, unguarded and bright, and reached back to feel them, running her fingers along the feathers with a kind of quiet wonder. "Oh," she said, "they are mended." "Does that mean..." he started. "It means," she said carefully, finding his face again with one hand, her thumbs brushing the scar on his chin, "that I have a choice. A mended angel who chooses to stay is no longer under the order's jurisdiction. She paused. It is old law, very old. I did not think it would ever apply to me. And, he said, barely above a breath. She smiled. It reached her sightless eyes. I met them bright. And she said, I find that I'm very fond of a badly played wooden flute and a prince who sits in the grass. The council was not pleased. The celestial orders sent 3 formal letters, each one colder than the last, each one unopened by Alaric, and used at fire starter by Ophelia, who said she could smell the self-importance on the parchment and found it unpleasant. His father called him to the throne room. Alaric went, stood before the old king in the high-ceilinged hall, where all important conversation went to echo, and said, very simply, very clearly, with his hands by his side and his eyes steady, that he had found something worth more than a throne, and he hoped his father would understand, but he was prepared for him not to. The king was quiet for a long time. Your mother, he said at last, in a voice that surprised them both, fell from a tower balcony when she was 18, and I caught her because I happened to be there at an inconvenient hour. I decided to love her before I knew her name. He looked at his son for a long moment. I would be a hypocrite, he said, of considerable size, to argue with you. The edict was quietly retired. They were married in the garden because of course they were. In the early morning, when the light came low and golden and the dew was still on everything. The roses were outrageous, white and deep red and a blush pink that nobody remembered planting, cascading over the old stone wall with the cheerful excess of a world that has decided to celebrate. She wore white, and her wings were folded gently behind her, and she found him at the altar by following the sound of his breathing, which she would later tell him she had memorized on the very first morning in the thorn bushes. He took her hands and leaned close to her ear and said, "You look." "Don't be," she said, smiling. "Be kind about it." "I was going to say extraordinary," he said, which is different from kind. She kissed him first, which was not traditional order of the ceremony, and which made the assembled court emit a collective sound of surprised delight. He laughed against her lips. She could feel them too. The laughter warmed the realness of him, and she held his face in both hands and kissed him again more slowly, the way you return to a place you already know is home. And behind her, her wings spread wide in the morning light, grey and silver, and suddenly at the very tips, catching gold. You know, they say in that kingdom that the garden at the palace edge blooms every single year without fail. White roses and grey feathers and something gold at the edges of everything. As though the world itself remembers what was kept and what was chosen and what, in the end, stayed. And on still mornings, if you pass the old cottage near the wall, you can sometimes hear very softly and quite badly played a little wooden flute. Good night, my love. Sweet dreams.
Where the roses remember, in a garden of grey, where the wild things grow, I found you by the wall in the morning glow. Your wings were broken, your eyes couldn't see. You read me like a map, and you set me free. I played the notes all wrong, but you stayed anyway. Your fingers on my face like the light of